Welcome to the first in our lunchtime lecture series for 2022. It's going to be a really exciting year, and this is the first in, as I said, our series of lunchtime lectures. We have different series of lectures. Some are in the evenings, and these ones are at lunchtime. And one of the things that we found over the pandemic years is that our attendance at these lunchtime lectures has been really high if we give them virtually. So one of the things that we've decided to try is to have these lectures always be online, so that you can just have your sandwich, come to a lecture, hear about some really amazing aspect of the natural world, and then just go straight back to work rather than having to come all the way into central London. We may try kind of a hybrid thing later on, but for now these lectures will be virtual, because we get people from all over the world. We have people in the chat. I see people from Bloomsbury, from Toronto, from Italy. So everybody's here to hear about pangolins. Now, those of you who don't know about the Linnean Society, the Linnean Society is one of the oldest learned societies that's devoted to the study and understanding of natural history. And our vision is a world where nature is understood, valued, and also protected. So we're devoted to studying the natural world, but also thinking about how we disseminate that knowledge and how we engage and interest more and more people from all walks of life in appreciating, understanding, and also committing themselves to protecting the world in which we live. So if you are not a fellow of the Linnean Society, please do consider becoming a fellow. The application form is on our website, and I've discovered that it's now virtual, so it's actually much easier to do than it was before. So do consider becoming a fellow. You can explore our website, see some of the things that we do, see some of the events that happen, both virtual and hopefully very soon in person in our buildings in Burlington House, in Piccadilly in London. But please do consider becoming a fellow. But actually today we're here to do something really, really exciting, to launch this lunchtime lecture series for 2022. We have with us today Charles Imogor from Cambridge University. He's a PhD candidate in zoology, but he's also a National Geographic explorer. He's from Nigeria's Cross River region, where he was first involved in gorilla conservation, but now he's moved on to pangolin conservation for his PhD research. He will talk to us today about the biological uniqueness of pangolins, and I've always wanted to see a pangolin, so I'm really excited about hearing about this, but also talk about pangolin trafficking. Pangolins are one of the most trafficked mammals in the world, and so we'll end with some recommendations which can help us combat the illicit pangolin trade and ultimately help these populations of these wonderful animals survive. So Charles, I'm really excited to hear your talk. Over to you, and please, audience, do put your questions in the Q&A box, and then when Charles is finished, we can relay those to him so you can get all your questions answered. Over to you, Charles.
Thank you very much, Sandy, for the kind introduction. And hi, everyone. Glad to be here today. Such an honor to be at the Linnean Society. What we have on the screen here is not a very, it is a graphic photo, although it does not depict the scale of the problem we might be talking about today. These are scales of pangolins, obviously taken out from pangolins in the hand, flicking through the scale as my hand. I don't mean to sound like a hero, talking about holding pangolin scales like that. There was a sad moment that I encountered when I had pangolin scales, and that's what we will be talking about today. When COVID started, headlines like this were very popular. Bats, pangolins, and other animals, villains and victims of SARS-CoV-2. Bats in the end blamed for potentially causing COVID, the origin of pangolins, perhaps intermediary, and then humans on the other end. The question that really interested me was this: billions of victims. Thankfully, months later, research showed that bats and pangolins were not even on the market in China when during the stipulated time of the outbreak. So these may have been the time that lots of people knew about pangolins. I chat to people now and then. When I say pangolins, it's a pangolin researcher. Most people go, oh, COVID. And I'm like, well, pangolins were, something before COVID. And one of those things is actually a very sad story as well, is that pangolins have been traded a lot, and they show up in the news. Headlines like these have been very common. Nigeria seizes scales from 15,000 dead pangolins, and pangolin seizures from Nigeria and China and Vietnam and all these places. The pangolins have also been very, very common, although within a particular niche. Maybe me and other researchers were very keen and all that, and people interested in pangolins. But pangolins as well, outside the purported links to COVID and the news about their seizures, have existed for, have unique values in them. But just before I move on, if you were like me wondering right now why animals with such cute eyes would and should be ever trafficked, I think it's an interesting thing to think about, but it may also mean that you don't sleep properly at night, because the answers are not really easy to come by. Pangolins represent millions of years of evolution, about 65 million years of evolution. And if a biopic were to be made for pangolins, I would suggest it to be called The Last Polydota. This is because when pangolins evolved about 65 million years ago, they diverged into a new group called the Polydota, and pangolins are the only mammals in that group today. So the Polydota are toothless, scaly, Euterian, which are placental mammals. You may be thinking, well, this animal looks really similar to the armadillo. Yes, you are correct, although you may be wrong to think they're related. So pangolins are more related to cats and dogs than they are to armadillos. Again, when the divergence occurred, they became more taxonomically related to cats and dogs. Although, yes, they're all anteaters and they look similar. Pangolins have specialized feeding habits, very specialized. As a matter of fact, they feed on almost exclusively on ants and termites. Obviously, they get some grits of sand and maybe some twigs here and there, but the feed on ants and termites with very long tongues that are apparently longer than the length of their body when stretched out. So pangolins are very unique animals. And as we will see down the line, I have been opportune to interact with these animals. Well, not so much, at least just study them. And it gives me so much great joy. And I hope you find this interesting as well. You may be wondering, so where are pangolins? And where, if I wanted to see one and know more about them. So there are 8 species of pangolins on the continent, in the world, 4 on the continent of Africa, and 4 in Asia. So there's the giant pangolin, the Temminck's pangolin, the white-bellied pangolin, and the black-bellied pangolin. And then there's the Chinese, the Indian pangolin, the Sunda pangolin, and the Philippines pangolin. And a bit of fun fact here, and I just realized this a few days ago when someone made this art. I worked with an artist to make this illustration. There's an African pangolins, and this may be just a cool fact if you wanted to become like, pangolin nerd. African pangolins seem to be named after prominent features of their body. So that they have. So the white-bellied pangolin, for example, is named after named because it's got like white belly. That is really, really easy, but quite nice to know. And the black-bellied pangolin, on the other hand, the opposite, white and black. The giant pangolin, really big pangolin, the largest pangolin species out there, and the Temminck's pangolin, which may actually defy this fun fact a bit. On the other hand, you have the Indian pangolin, named after the country. The Philippines pangolin that is found on the island of Palawan in Philippines, the Sunda pangolin as well. Well, back to the Temminck's pangolin. Temminck's pangolin, though it's named after the zoologist George Conrad, who named this animal, is also called the Cape pangolin. So unfortunately, it's named after a place and really doesn't add up to this. But these are not all the pangolins. These are all the pangolins that we have out there. And you're very right to think that, yes, they're all 8. Although recently, those findings that showed that there was a pangolin that evolved about, that got extinct about, species that got extinct about 2 million years ago. And it existed in Europe during the early Pleistocene era. So there's still so much we're trying to know about pangolins. 65 years ago when they probably evolved, and they're still there, and we lost some, and we have 8 species now. Well, it's fair to say at this point that pangolins are immortal. Yeah, you could say that, but I wouldn't say that right now. That would be grossly misleading, because though pangolins are evolutionarily distinct, they are globally endangered. That means that they're at the verge of leaving the earth, and we may not have any pangolins in the wild anymore. And we've seen examples like that in the past. The dodo, Mauritius flightless bird that was hunted to extinction for food because of its large size, a very tame animal. The stellar sea cow, slaughtered to extinction as well for meat and leather in the 18th century, and the northern white rhino that's on the edge of getting extinct. Pangolins are threatened. I should have warned you earlier that there's some graphic photos in this presentation today. Apologies, but I couldn't hold myself back from not including these, because I think this really depicts what we're talking about today. The cuteness of pangolins, but the reality on the ground, which may make you wonder, like as I mentioned, why are these animals so cute and lovely treated the way they are? So this is a pangolin. This is a photo of a pangolin that I took myself the first time I went into the forest for my research to look for live pangolins, actually, for my work. And unfortunately, the first animal I saw was a dead pangolin, this pangolin, in the forest with a hunter. And I took a photo of the pangolin, and yeah, really sad. It makes me very emotional. And this is also from the same region, pangolin held in a snare that was set for, I don't know, pangolins or other animals, but these are how pangolins fare in the forest in most places. So pangolins are pushed for food and medicine locally. However, the international demand, mainly from Asia, is fueling demand for just scales that are used in traditional medicine. There's no formal estimate to let us know what the impact of this, transnational trade is on pangolin population. But as seizure data suggests, pangolin populations are not doing good. So those photos I took them somewhere here in Southeast Nigeria, where my research, my ecological work is focused on, although that's not the focus of what we'll be talking about today. Nigeria has been a trade hub for pangolins over the years. But what really is Nigeria's role in the countries, in the trafficking of pangolins, the global trafficking of pangolins? Before we explore that, just a bit of background around Nigeria and the pangolin trade. So Nigeria is the only African country in the top 10 countries involved in the most incidents of pangolin trafficking. That's a mouthful, but if you had the top 10 countries, Nigeria is the only African country there. Well, as at 2017, but I don't think things have changed much. Pangolin hunting and trade are illegal in Nigeria, but enforcement is weak. These are also photos from part of my research. These are from wild meat. The last one here, the one on the far right, this is from wild meat market, where pangolins are hunted and sold for meat. And these are pangolins killed by hunters somewhere around my study site as well. Well, there are laws in Nigeria, as I mentioned, and contravention of this law should result in a fine of about $12,000 for the first offense, and an imprisonment of 1 year, and without an option of the fine for the second offense. But enforcement is weak, unfortunately. Nigeria is also party to CITES, that's the convention that prohibits the international trafficking of pangolin, trade of pangolin scales, and actually pangolin meat as well. So pangolins being in CITES 1 means that no wild specimens no wild specimens of pangolin should be ever traded, commercially on an international level. But we have seen a lot of that still happening. Well, basically what's happening right now is that pangolin scales have been monetized, and Nigeria plays a huge role in this global monetization of pangolin scales. And when I say Nigeria, I don't mean the institution, I don't mean the the politics, I mean the geography, Nigeria. So back to the research question that we wanted to, that I'll be talking about today, that we tackled. What we wanted to characterize Nigeria's role in illegal pangolin trade. And we're looking for the trends, the routes, the modus operandi of traffickers, and the efforts to curb pangolin decline. And when we did this, we paid attention to two timelines. Remember, pangolins are traded internationally, but actually really trafficked because it's illegal. And there's been loads of seizures of this pangolin trade. And pangolins are also, there's also a regulation to restrict or actually prohibit the trade of this, prohibit pangolin trade, but that's not the case on the ground. And so when we sought to characterize Nigeria's role, we paid attention to two timelines. One was when CITES Appendix 1 listing became effective. That's when pangolins were put on the CITES Appendix 1 that restricts the commercial sale of any pangolin specimens. And then two, the second timeline was when COVID-19 international travel ban was introduced by the Nigerian government. That's in March 2020. The second thing we did was to attempt to quantify the minimum number of individuals that would have been involved in Nigeria-linked seizures. Remember, we're just focusing on Nigeria as a geography, or rather Nigeria's geography. And the minimum number of pangolins involved we defined as the smallest possible number of pangolin individuals needed to produce a unit mass of trafficked scales. And so what we did really simply, we looked up for records of pangolin seizures that were linked to Nigeria from 2010, when we saw the first record, to September 2021, when this research was conducted. And we went and chatted to Nigeria law enforcement officials, especially, specifically the Nigeria Customs Service. We interviewed them to understand trends in enforcement efforts to curb pangolin trafficking, levels of awareness of pangolin trafficking within the service, and outcomes of detected cases of pangolin trafficking. We also paid attention to the two timelines we talked about earlier, before CITES and actually after CITES, Appendix 1 listing. And lastly, we visited warehouses where confiscated pangolin materials are kept in Nigeria, and we sampled the warehouses to identify pangolin species that were represented, and from that identify the species from the scale and assess the proportion of each species in the seized shipment. So we did this in Lagos and Abuja, and there are 4 pangolin species across the continent, because as you will see, the pangolin scales leaving through or from Nigeria are just African pangolins. So while there are 4 species, the giant pangolin and the Temminck's pangolin are harder to identify from scales, and so we group them together. And then this is the scale of a black-bellied pangolin and a white-bellied pangolin that we were able to identify. And so this grouping was to increase our confidence. So we applied just a little formula, which I'm not going to stress on. The first variable here is the relative proportional mass that we got from sorting out the scales. We multiplied that by the total confiscated sales, what we saw being trafficked over time from 2010 to 2021, and we divided by the mass to individual conversion factors. Now, this is simply the dried mass of all the scales from a particular pangolin for each species. There are some assumptions associated with this formula, but I'm going to skip that and point you to a direction where you can learn more about this. Now, what did we find? We discovered about 80 Nigeria-linked seizures, totaling about 190 kilograms of pangolin specimens. Most of that was scales, and only 3 kilograms were dried meat. These scales would have come from about 0.8 million pangolins across all species, so 800,000 across all species. And most of them were white-bellied pangolin. That's the pangolin species that I focus on for my research, and the one I showed some graphic photos of. Intelligence gathering was also very crucial. So within Nigeria, we observed that when pangolin scales or pangolin shipments arrived at the port, the almost made it out, because those shipments were always confiscated outside the country. Very little, or maybe just one or two, were seized at in any of Nigeria's ports. But intelligence gathering, that's identifying where what is about to be trafficked and confiscating that before they get to the port, was a very useful strategy, which is very helpful, as we talk about much later, as an intervention to focus on. Only 4 of 20 suspects were prosecuted in Nigeria that were arrested, and all of them were prosecuted actually just last year, which may suggest that, you know, the internet, well, there's increase in attention on pangolins, including law enforcement. So one thing that was very interesting as well was that COVID-19 induced travel restrictions likely reduced trafficking activities. So this is the mean mass per seizure. This is a graph of it over time. So from 2010, 2011, we can't see much, but it starts building up. And now remember the 2 timelines we talked about: CITES Appendix 1 listing, 2016, 2017. You can see that the mean mass seized began to go up until 2020, when it tapered a bit. And that's also coincides with when COVID-19 travel restrictions were put in place. So it's very likely that because you know, the commercial war, the global commercial war, was put on hold, pangolin traffickers also could not get their things out. Or perhaps even when things began settled off a bit, people were still skeptical. Traffickers were still skeptical. And although we don't have much data for 2021, we missed a few seizures that year, and I think another seizure this year not included in this data. The trend is beginning to go upwards again. The impact of pangolin CITES Appendix 1 listing on pangolin trafficking was unclear, because the marked rise in seizures from 2017, when the listing became effective, coincided with improvement in law enforcement efforts within Nigeria. And we inferred law enforcement efforts from an increase in the number of training courses, and increase in awareness of illegal wildlife trade issues within the service, and increased international collaborations. All shipments, as we expected, were confiscated were destined for Asia, with a rapid increase for seizures that were trafficked by the sea. And there may be lots of reasons for this, but 2 reasons we highlighted were corruption. Nigeria is scoring very low in the corruption index, and infrastructure for international travel across the continent. So what's happening here is that China represents an import country, because you can see the pink. These countries here are countries that played mainly import roles. Nigeria, on the other side, playing export roles, but sometimes transit as origin, and sometimes transit as well. So there were also cases where seizures with shipments made it through to Europe before going down to Asia, to the Asian continent. There may be a new demand, or particular demand, for pangolin claws now. These are pangolin claws, again, that I saw when I sampled those scales I showed earlier. Because in addition to the scales, pangolin claws pangolin claws were separated from scales in 2 of the seizures in 2021. That's never been documented. So there may be specific demand for pangolin claws now, because earlier they were grouped together, but now this separation suggests that there may be particular demand from it from the source. These are all, you know, I guess we started with a bit of exciting stuff and cool illustrations about pangolins and all of that, and then we went into the nitty-gritty, which is the reality, and unfortunately some almost doom and gloom picture. But that's not the aim here. That's not the message. I am an optimist, despite despite my research. But one of the things we can learn from this, well, a lot of things we can learn from this, from doing this kind of research, is then that it informs policy. And one of the things that we have seen is that, or that we think, excuse me, is that the 0.8 million pangolins exceeds previous global estimates. And these may have been underestimating the impact of the trade on pangolin species, and also just lessening efforts to save pangolins. Now, this research cements Nigeria's position in efforts to combat the illegal trade, and by that, it just puts the spotlight on the institutions and organizations responsible for this to try to come up with solutions. We couldn't have been able to understand the different aspects of pangolin trade linked to Nigeria if we had skipped, for example, chatting to law enforcement agents, because we wouldn't have understood the dynamics and to better interpret the trend we were seeing. There's a need to strengthen protection for prosecution, to increase prosecution actually, because only 4 out of 20 that were apprehended to have been prosecuted is not a good number. And there's research showing that prosecution really deters people, and actually just, adherence to the rule of law really deters people from engaging in illegal activities. Now, this is not something we captured so much in this research, but I'm a believer of community-based intervention. And although there was no direct links to it from this research, all of these things I've mentioned are very reactive measures. I really think community-based intervention is a proactive measure to ensure that pangolins in the first place are not even killed, and so we don't even need to look for them. There'll be no need to prosecute people, or even make those regulations. Well, maybe we should, but not so much. And one of the things that we've been doing with funding from the Conservation Leadership Program in the Ruford Foundation is to work with communities. So we're out once in a while when we can and have funding, is to provide notebooks to students. There's a pangolin branded notebooks. Pangolins are endangered. Why are pangolins endangered? How can I save a pangolin? These are distributed to students, to primary and secondary school students who have now been put into a pangolin club, visited once in a while to chat about pangolins, and the adults are not left aside. So there's also T-shirts just designed to share to people, just to keep the conversation going and raise awareness of pangolins. And in case you were wondering what's on the back side of this, so this is a pidgin and translation. The black one here means pangolins are our heritage. Let's try and protect them. And the other one translates to let's join hands to protect pangolins. And I really think that's the call for action here. You may be removed from pangolin habitats, but I really think saving pangolins requires a concerted effort from people on the ground, people at the policy space, researchers who are interested in pangolins, who are not just doing pangolin research, but trying to make that get to the policymakers and just the public who once in a while share stories about pangolins on social media and chat to people about pangolins. So thank you very much for listening, and thanks to the funders of this research and the work, and just to acknowledge the contribution of all the collaborators who have contributed to this work. And this is a published paper. You can read the open access paper online by searching the scale of Nigeria's involvement in transnational illegal pangolin trade. All the cute illustrations I showed were made by volunteer artists for Pangolino. That's a science communication outlet that we are trying to get people engaged in pangolin research through. So again, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Charles. That was absolutely fascinating. And it is tragic to see all those dead pangolins and all those pangolin scales. We've got a couple of questions coming in, and I'm sure the audience will have more. Please remember to put them into the Q&A box, and then I'll ask Charles these questions. Okay, so first question is about education people at that pink end, at that kind of import end, is how important how important is this in stopping and reducing trafficking, the education on that pink import end?
Yeah, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen here for a while. That's very important. And, you know, in addition to education, or I guess the main idea of education is to change behavior. And that is very critical, because what we've seen is that people do know, in some places know about all of the tragic things and how they're contributing, but that really does not change behavior. So yes, it is very important, and there are campaigns currently ongoing to change behavior, to get people not to use pangolin scales for traditional medicine and all. But we can see, you know, this is pure economics. As long as there's demand, there will always be supply. So yes, working on the tail end is important, but working on the other end is also very important. And one thing I did not mention is that there's been well, African pangolins are doing relatively better than Asian pangolins in terms of population and the population size, and so the decline in Asian pangolin numbers has made African pangolins become the target now.
Ah, so it's just moving that trade from one continent to another, because the Asian pangolin populations are so depleted.
Yes, that is correct. The shift in demand.
Ah, okay. So so I guess the answer to that is yes, education is actually important at all corners of that triangle. Yes. You know, all the corners, including the kind of through, you know, in Europe as well, probably.
Yeah, I think so. You know, seeing that in the late 90s, pangolin scales were used to make cowboy boots in the US. It's not very common knowledge, but we've not seen that trend happening anymore, even seizures going there. So, you know, there's so many countries and geographies that have been implicated over time. But now it's just two continents, mainly, you know, Africa, Asia, supply, demand, and it's very important to try to change behavior. Although when these behaviors are, you know, part of a culture, it just becomes very difficult to break. You know, it almost needs a generational shift for it to go through.
Yeah. So what do you? So I'm going to kind of follow that up with a question of my own. Education is quite important, but it is kind of culturally very, very embedded. And how do you feel about the different kinds of education? Because you can tell people that things are bad, things are bad, things are bad. But is there a way of turning this into something that's not about blame?
Yeah, I think that's very important. People would usually kick back, you know, when the sense, or at least just be defensive when they feel accused. And I think the messaging is very important. And one of the ways we're trying to do this in Nigeria, for example, is, you know, turning the story around, rather than saying don't kill pangolins. We're saying pangolins are our heritage, you know, your heritage, my heritage. Yeah. So let's try to protect them. That sense of ownership. On the demand side, messages like, you know, consuming pangolin scales could mean there are no more pangolin scales for you to consume in the future, or you know, just saying you could get these medicinal benefits from these other products, and providing alternatives are very useful. I think it's a very complex one, but I do agree that a message of blame is never a good approach.
Yeah. So there's another question, which is kind of an interesting one, and is there a correlation between trafficking in pangolin scales and claws? And I want to ask you what pangolin claws are used for, and other animal parts like rhino horn, tiger parts, etc. So is there a substitution going on that you can't get the kind of rhino horn? So you go to, are they used for the same, or do they substitute for one another, all of these various trafficked things?
That's very interesting. I'm not sure that these products are substituted, but we do see them trafficked together. So most of the pangolin seizures that we analyzed had ivory in them, sometimes rhino as well, and other products. The substitution, not so much, because in a way they serve different purposes. You know, the carving of pangolin of ivory is not very common, or I've really never heard about, unless for the amulets like the scales you talked. I'm sorry, the claws. So pangolin scales are used to make amulets sometimes, and we'll begin to see that increasingly happen more. So yes, the substitution, perhaps not so much. Pangolin scales just are believed to cure, you know, loads of medicines, and I guess it may be, and again, not so much, I really don't know about this, but it may be that, you know, one is more expensive than the other and people are going for this one. But I do know, you know, that, you know, for a long time, there's been increasing demand for both products. So it's not like we're seeing one going down and the other one going up.
So despite education efforts, still there's a huge demand. So how do we persuade people that these are medicinally actually not very effective?
Yeah, I was chatting to someone the other day, and you know, saying, well, there's first of all science showing that they don't have any medicinal properties. So pangolin scales have the same components of our fingernails, keratin.
So you can bite your fingernails instead.
Yeah, exactly. And I say, you know, so wrote a blog and I said, we could do this. We could say, you know, this and no, there's proof that this is not effective. And there was a, you know, a bit of a conversation saying, well, people already know that. You know, so people already know this is not effective. So what's happening now is that there's a lot of behavior change studies going on, including campaigns to try to change people's behavior, but really trying to get it to a point that triggers them. And my research really doesn't look at the the demand side of things. So I can't speak so much about that, but on the supply side, there are ways that we could do that by increasingly supporting communities to you know, come together and protect pangolins. There's always a sense of ownership for what they have. And then when the demand is, you know, when the supply stops, and hopefully stops not just because there's law enforcement, but because people see the need to, you know, stop killing pangolins, then there's going to be a starvation on the demand side, which should at least make people reconsider the actions.
Yeah. So that comes on to the next question is, you know, your work with communities and looking at pangolins as heritage. Do you see that message really taking hold and having positive effect?
Yes, I think so. There's no data to show that. But my interaction with community people, especially hunters, suggests that most of them really want to contribute to conserving not just pangolins, but anything. You know, there's always the talk, and some people don't believe this. And then, yes, it's wise to be skeptical about this, because, you know, sometimes people say, oh, I'm doing this because I want to feed and I want to survive. And that is really true in some cases. And so giving them the opportunity to protect pangolins, or at least just have a sense of ownership, is a good way to get them involved on the protection side.
So you find people really are changing.
Yes.
Changing their behavior. And
yes.
Do you think there's
or at least considering changing their behavior?
Yeah, there's the considering. Well, considering is the first step, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, you have to think about it first, usually, before you change your behavior. So someone's asked a really interesting question, it's very difficult to study pangolins scientifically. So it's really because, you know, you saying you were looking for pangolins, yet poachers seem to be able to find them relatively easily you know, because there's so many of them traded. Do you think that's because there's just a lot of people out there hunting for them, or do they have methods that are better than ours?
Well, first of all, local ecological knowledge is really rich. And I've experienced that myself. Finding pangolins, the first time I went out, I had to use a hunter to lead me to go to where I'm most likely to find pangolins. And the first night, we found a white-bellied pangolin. And yes, I think, but also that depends on where you go. I think there are pangolins in my study site. And right now during the dry season, it's easier to find them than in the rainy season. So after that time, you know, just building my camp around there, I have been seeing lots of pangolins. But I guess in, you know, places like China, yes, it would be, you may not find a lot there, but still you will need people who know the landscape to take you there. So yes, I think local ecological knowledge plays a huge role in that, and also just the declining population of pangolins.
Yeah, that's a really powerful argument for working on the supply side, is that local ecological knowledge is what allows the kind of large scale trafficking, I guess. Because without it, people would have a hard time finding pangolins, wouldn't they?
That is true. Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. Someone's put in the chat that dogs are used to find pangolins in Nepal.
Yes, that's correct.
So,
I think, yeah, Sam Voss at University of Washington.
yeah, that's true for armadillos. That's true for armadillos and then the New World tropics as well, which who are kind of like pangolins, look like pangolins, but are a little bit different. Yeah. Oh, that's really fantastic. So I'm just seeing if there's any other questions. There don't seem to be any other questions, but I just like to, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for a fascinating talk. And that you've probably seen in the chat lots and lots of amazing talk. You know, what a great topic, and you know, the almost 50 people who've been here have really enjoyed this. And thank you so much for coming along and doing it. And really good luck with your research, and do write that PhD. I'm so glad one paper is published already. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much, Charles.
Thank you so much, Sandy.
See you soon.
Take care. Bye.
Bye, everybody.